Today, we're going to unpack a message about resilience, one that was written under the most extreme pressure you can imagine. It's basically a final letter from a mentor to his successor, and it's just packed with these urgent instructions on how to endure, how to lead, and how to hold on to what's true in a world that feels like it's spinning into chaos. All right, let's get right into it.
So the letter kicks off with this raw, arresting plea. This is not some casual invitation, you know? It's a call to share in a burden that comes with a huge personal cost. And right away, it just sets the stakes sky high. So you have to ask, what is going on here? What's the story behind a request like that?
Well, the writer is the Apostle Paul. He's a foundational figure in early Christianity. And right now, he's imprisoned in Rome, literally awaiting execution. And the person he's writing to is Timothy, his trusted young protege, who's been tasked with leading a community that's under some serious pressure. So this is an abstract philosophy. It's a real-time crisis manual written from death row.
Okay, so what's the core of this message? I mean, given the life or death situation, every single word counts, right? And Paul starts with a command that kind of flips our usual understanding of strength completely on its head.
Now, what's really interesting here is the nuance in the language. According to theologian Dr. Robert Yarbrough, this isn't Paul telling Timothy to just, try harder or suck it up. The original language actually suggests something more like be strengthened. The whole idea is that grace isn't something you earn, it's a divine power source that you have to actively draw from. So it's a strength that flows to you, not just from you. And that is a huge distinction for anyone who's feeling totally burned out. Paul knows his time is short. He gets it. So his main strategy to make sure the mission survives him is to build a system, almost like a spiritual supply chain. And honestly, it's a timeless strategy for preserving any kind of vital culture or knowledge.
And this right here illustrates that system perfectly. It's a model of person-to-person apprenticeship or discipleship. You see it right there. Paul taught Timothy. Now it's Timothy's job to entrust that exact same message to reliable people. But here's the key qualifier. Those reliable people also have to be able to teach others. It's a 4-generation chain and is designed to create a movement that just keeps going on its own. The most important part is that every single link in that chain is both a receiver and a transmitter.
But look, this kind of commitment, it takes a very specific mindset. So to get Timothy ready for the hardship he knows is coming, Paul gives him 3 really powerful metaphors. And these aren't just jobs, they're mental models for resilience.
First up, this soldier. A soldier's main goal is to please their commanding officer, right? So they can't get tangled up in what Paul calls civilian affairs, which, for us today, could be anything from endless doom scrolling on social media to stressing about our careers. The whole point is a singular, focused loyalty to the mission. It's about cutting through all that noise.
Next, you've got the athlete. An athlete competes to win, but they only get that victor's crown if they follow the rules. So the takeaway here is that success isn't just random, it demands discipline and sticking to the principles of the faith. You don't get to just make up your own game as you go.
And finally, the farmer. Now, as Dr. Yarbrough points out, we really shouldn't romanticize this. Ancient farming was grueling, back-breaking, subsistence-level work. It was uncertain, it was painful. But here's the payoff. The hard-working farmer is the very first to get a share of the crops. The reward is directly tied to all that unglamorous, necessary hard work.
So, you've got the mindset of a soldier, an athlete, and a farmer. But what's the ultimate motivation? What fuels this kind of endurance? Well, Paul points Timothy back to the absolute bedrock of their entire belief system.
Just think about this for a second. For a man on death row, writing to someone he's asking to join him in suffering, this is everything. The resurrection isn't just some abstract theological idea. It's the ultimate proof that suffering and death are not the final word. It is the engine of all hope.
Paul then quotes what was probably an early Christian hymn, and it lays out the stakes with crystal clarity. The first 2 lines, they're promises. If you stick with it through the suffering, you get life and glory. The next one is a pretty stark warning. But that last one is so crucial. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. Because he can't deny his own character, which means he has to uphold both the promises and the warnings. He can't be anything other than who he is.
So the final challenge Paul gets into isn't just about persecution from the outside. It's about a corrosive threat from within, the danger of false teaching spreading right inside the community itself. Paul warns Timothy to stay away from what he calls godless chatter.
He says it's totally worthless and it's actively destructive. And Dr. Yarbrough draws this direct modern parallel to the obsessive political and cultural debates that just dominate our social media feeds, where people put all their hope in human solutions, and it just leads to more and more division and anger.
Paul even calls out two of the false teachers by name, Hymenaeus and Philetus, and he points out their specific error. They were teaching that the resurrection was a spiritual thing that had already happened. Now that might sound like a tiny detail, but it was devastating. Why? Because it completely guts the future hope that gives people the strength to endure all the suffering they're facing right now.
But even facing all this internal decay, this external threat, Paul offers one final, unshakable assurance. He says, despite the chaos, despite the betrayals and the false teachings, God's foundation is solid. It stands firm. Ultimate reality isn't swayed by human chatter or failure.
And this brings us right back to Timothy's core job. Paul tells him to be a worker who correctly handles the word of truth. So this ancient letter, born from a moment of crisis, leaves us with a really critical question for our own time. In a world that is saturated with information and distraction, with just endless, godless chatter, how do we focus on and faithfully handle what is actually true?